Welcome to Your Future in Sales and Marketing, a podcast that helps you make great career decisions to get the most out of your career journey. We'll introduce you to the AXR network of established senior leaders and a handpicked group of future aspiring leaders who have it all in front of them. You'll learn what it's like in the top job and how to get there. Your hosts from AXR's specialist sales and marketing recruitment team will also land bonus episodes for you on how to work with recruiters, write a resume, and smash an interview, as well as our very popular market updates. It's the podcast that has it all. You can't get this career advice anywhere else. Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Future in Sales and Marketing. I'm Andrew Cannock and I'm a specialist sales and category recruiter. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Briar Keenan. Briar is a former Unilever and Diageo employee with experience across multiple functions who's now carving out a portfolio career for herself in commercial excellence consulting and contracting. We discuss her diverse career journey as well as dive into what it actually looks like to go out on your own and why it might just be something for you to potentially consider. We really hope you enjoy the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this. It'll be a really interesting conversation, I think. So we'll start with our usual icebreaker. What's your favorite brand? And you can't pick one that you've worked on.
This is like being asked what your favorite song is, sort of thing. It made me go down like a track of what my favorite products were and like what's kind of most relevant to me. But I think because it's a grocery podcast, I'll stick with the grocery product. I really like Remedy as a brand, I think. And I'm like pretty much addicted to their like soda-ly yuzu little cans. So that's a product that I reckon I'd buy every time I go to the supermarket. And then also I'm really loving Mr. Chen's, which is like the dumpling brand.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's like always in my, always on my trolley sort of thing every time I go to the supermarket.
Yeah, awesome. And is it just the products themselves or is there anything you like about the sort of businesses? Or?
Yeah, I think they've got a really good range. They don't have them in New Zealand. So that's every time I notice it now whenever I go to the supermarket in Australia. Yeah,
so you just load up when you're here.
Exactly.
Cool. Let's jump in. So tell us a bit about life before career. So where you grew up and what your kind of early years were like.
So I'm from New Zealand, as you can hear with my accent. So my parents were in tourism and hospitality when I was younger. So we spent a lot of time sort of around regional New Zealand in tourism destinations, ending up in Queenstown. So I spent most of my upbringing in Queenstown, which is a beautiful place to grow up in. Yeah, so lots of like nature-based, lots of skiing. That would kind of characterize my upbringing. And then I went to school in this like agricultural city at the very bottom of New Zealand called Invercargill. And there's actually a whole heap of like James Hargis alumni that went through Unilever. So for some reason that has exported quite a few FMCG people through
FMCG nursery. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Or it's like nepotism and we bring people through the business.
Probably.
Like that, yeah. And then I went to Christchurch to Canterbury University, where I studied chemical and process engineering. And so that was very much like taught me how to problem solve and to process a lot of data and I guess like lots of modeling and things like that. And probably what stuck with me most through that was in my last year of uni, I did a project management paper and a pollution paper, and those two like really stuck with me and I feel like have kind of been a through line through my career since then. But by the end of uni, I was like very into sustainability and that like I left uni with that being really important to me. And then also my last year of uni there, we had the Christchurch earthquake. So that was, a really kind of tumultuous time. And I think really taught me a lot about, when things go wrong and how kind of like life kind of continues on. And I can see how that sort of weaved through my career as well since then too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what drew you into FMCG land?
So the people, I think, as I mentioned before, there are a couple of people from my high school that had gone through Unilever. So it was more actually that when I finished uni, so I didn't go straight into FMCG from university. So I did a couple of years in tech. That was when kind of Uber and Xero and like Bumble were all popping off. And that was like where you would go to, like a lot of people getting jobs in those sort of industries or companies. So I spent about 2 years in that sort of ecosystem. And then because it was very sort of startup oriented, I think having come from university that is very sort of feedback heavy, you're doing a lot of assignments and assessments, and then all of a sudden jumping from that into startup where you had no sort of job description. It was just whatever you needed to do that day was what was required of you. That then after that, I was kind of looking for something that was the complete opposite, which I found in a global organization. That was Unilever. I had some people that I really admired and looked up to that had gone through that grad program. And I had a couple of friends that actually flatmates in Auckland, 2 different flats that I was living in had people that worked at Unilever.
Oh, really? Wow.
So, I ended up going into Unilever mainly because of the people, and then staying because of, I guess, my interests. I feel like grocery is, I know you're really connected to the community in a way, like the products that you're working on are really relevant to people. The like influence that a brand can have, and especially a company like Unilever, probably has more influence than, say, a small government like New Zealand. That's something that really attracted me to the industry at the time.
Yeah. And your journey through FMCG has been really interesting because you've worked across a bunch of different functions. So you've gone from supply chain, category, account management, commercial excellence in some great businesses like Unilever being one, Diageo being another. Looking back, what were the kind of real key inflection points or key moments for you along the way?
I think I started off in demand planning, and I had an amazing manager in that first kind of 18 months at Unilever in the New Zealand business. And it was always sort of part of your development plans to look at moving to the Australian business. So I think that was a big inflection point, moving from the New Zealand business to the Australian business. But before that, I went from supply chain into category and had my first sort of taste of that customer development side of things. I then went to the Australian business back into supply chain, so through supply planning. And I was working on Ben & Jerry's and supply planning, and that was absolutely insane. It was the most intense 6 months of my career. High urgency. You're basically on from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. because it's about getting stock from A to B, and you're just always having to be calling and making sure, and like every step of the way has to be sort of hustled, and you're on the phone, and it was very intense. And I think from that experience, I was like, I don't know if that's my strength. And so I went back to category. And so I guess I keep kind of coming back to category is something that I'm drawn to. But a main inflection point, I would say, is we had a restructure in 2019. I think a lot of people talk about COVID being one of their key inflection points in their career, but I would say that my experience from COVID was more informed by the restructure that we had in 2019 at Unilever, where they split off like tea and household care, and we moved into business units. And then they also announced that we're moving out to North Rocks, so from the city office. And I think overnight, I think the stat was it was 20% of the workforce got made redundant in that process. And it really taught me there were people who had been through restructures before that were so cool and calm and collected. And then there was people like me and my friends who had never gone through it before that it was like, wow, this really feels like, it actually felt like the earthquake. Like it was that sort of level of, I don't know, intensity at the time.
The ground moving.
Yeah, the ground moving.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I learned a lot from that. Just, I guess one thing with that was the week before or the day before that was announced, there was like, I had an intensity around work, and I was so sort of, like this means everything. And all this work that I'd been working up to that I was really worried about, overnight it got put on the back burner. And we were going through a restructure and had completely different teams, and that was just not the priority anymore. So it made me kind of realize that about the work that you're working on is that sometimes if I'm taking it a bit too seriously, then to tone it back a little bit.
Yes, 100%. And I think, it's quite timely you're talking about that experience with Unilever, because it's hard to think of one like multinational FMCG that's not been through similar sort of changes in the last 12 months. And at the time we're recording this, Kimberly Clark bought Kenvue yesterday, which seemed to be a bit of a bolt out of the blue. So that kind of uncertainty, it's a bit of a constant. And I think I would say that experience has set me up for the kind of the market that it is at the moment. And I think
I think that there was a culture of change within Unilever. So yes, that was a big restructure at that point. But really every 18 months or 12 months, there was change. So it was really embedded and it was part of the DNA of the business. And that's definitely what I've seen since I've moved on from Unilever into other businesses within FMCG, that just because a business is big and just because a business is small doesn't necessarily mean that it has that built in or that resilience built in.
Yeah, 100%. So you've led people and you've driven change agendas in some pretty big businesses, Unilever, Masterpet, Diageo. What have been some of the most defining leadership lessons that you've taken from those environments?
I think that you can make some assumptions around like a big business versus a small business and kind of a level of sophistication that you might expect based on scale. So I think going through those different businesses has taught me that. And that actually some businesses don't require a level of sophistication that one might, if that makes sense. I knew from the great leaders that I had early in my career that having, choosing a role based on who your manager was, it was an important thing for me. And I guess every time I've strayed from that, I've kind of paid for it in some way.
It just shapes so much of your experience. I've spoken to people that work in businesses that might not be considered top tier, but they've had an exceptional manager and they've loved it and they've had a great experience. And I've also spoken to people in the exact opposite situation. Great business, really good role, but the leader isn't right for them. And they have the opposite experience. So I think that's a really important lesson to share.
But I think that like a key point with that is, you'll have like a great team and a great manager, and it could just be for 6 months and like really enjoying that moment, but knowing that that will change. I think that was something that I was maybe a bit slow to learn or to adjust to. And, especially in, I guess, the environment that we have at the moment where there's lots of restructures, like nothing's kind of concrete and certain. And so I guess that's where recruitment is important and having a good network and not being afraid to kind of move. But I guess that's probably more for the question. That's what would I? Yeah,
I mean, it's great that we're kind of like picking up these little tidbits along the way. And I think you make an interesting point in terms of, because when you talk about network and having those sorts of conversations, it's really about managing your career proactively and taking a bit of control, because there's always going to be those things that change that are outside of your control. And all that you can really focus on is what you can do. Totally. And we'll come on to that as a separate topic a bit later.
But I did want to say, like, with the leadership lesson, I think it is very much about like accepting failure. I think that's something that I've noticed in the industry, in FMCG specifically. I think that we're, as an industry, not great at accounting for failure and experimentation. And that's like a leadership lesson that I've taken away mainly, is that I've learned more through the tough times. And definitely at Unilever was a standout for that. I know I kind of keep coming back to that experience, but it really informed. It was like a extra university. But the fact that at the time that I was at Unilever, we were across so many categories that every year there was at least one like massive issue that was happening in some part of the portfolio that the rest of the business then had to kind of pull levers to support. And I have been in other businesses since then, and even in the sort of work that I'm doing now, where a lot of businesses can go 10 years without having anything that bad happen to them. And there's that saying that smooth seas never made a skillful sailor. And I really think that, when you're in businesses that are across a lot of categories, or within your career, you're moving across different categories and getting experience across different channels, then you're more likely to come across big problems like that where you overcome. But I think it's a sad part of kind of career development, is that you always have to be showing, your wins and your progress, and it's not as celebrated or, rewarded when you've had like really tough times and pushed through them.
Yeah, and what you've learned from it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned commercial excellence, which is a phrase that it's been around for a while, but you hear it kind of more and more these days. For someone who's got no familiarity with what commercial excellence is, how would you define it?
I usually think about it as sort of the umbrella function that includes category and NRM, sometimes shopper marketing, shelf insights, that sort of thing. I really liked Nicole Dennis's, like when she did the podcast with you guys, I think she used the analogy of the muscle in the brain for the sales team. And I think it's really important to have that internal functionality so that your national account managers, national business managers, field team spend most of their time face to face with the customer. And therefore, you need a team internally that is, I guess, like churning through that information that they're receiving back from the field or from the customer teams, and then, providing feedback back, like closing that feedback loop. And that they can focus on kind of delivering and executing a plan rather than also at the same time trying to come up with that plan.
Yes.
So
and it frees them up to do what they should do best, which is really understanding the customer, what's important to them, and then bringing that information back into the business to help inform those plans. Yeah.
But I do definitely see it as like I think that salespeople are phenomenal. Like I've done, a couple of roles as a national account manager, and, it's really tough, like the conversations that they're having, and it can be, monotonous in a way. It can have like great, really rewarding times, but being kind of easy to work with. I mean, that's one of the tag survey questions sort of thing, like is a business easy to work with? And I think if you have a really strong commercial excellence or brain function within the business, that really helps your account team, like the muscle side, be really easy to work with, because they're not kind of juggling being great, having great relationships. They're also have an internal team that's rating the business for them on their behalf.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And across different businesses, aspects of commercial excellence will exist to varying degrees. So there might be a category team, there might be a bit of resource around revenue growth management. But if someone, if a GM of a business or just a leader of a business is going, I feel like we need to start implementing true commercial excellence, and asked you kind of where to start, what do you think the sort of foundations are? What are the first priorities?
I think the priorities are defining what the key challenges are in the business, what you're trying to solve for. I think every business that I've experienced needs to have a different version of commercial excellence. Like there's no one size fits all. And I think that can sometimes be where the implementation of commercial excellence can fall over. I guess when, say, a leader's coming into the business and they've come from one business and they want what they've had previously implemented in the new company that they're in, and it doesn't quite work like that. And that's what I'm really enjoying as part of the work that I'm doing now, is being able to help figure out what that might look like. But I think so part of that is defining your challenges. So what is actually important to this business? So then strategy is about allocating resource. And so if your commercial excellence team is strategic, then that's, I guess, what you're trying to solve for. But then also right-sizing your team and, maybe stepping in an iterative process. And then finally, definitely data and insights and reporting. That would be like, if you don't have that sort of set up, then you're really setting up anyone that you bring in a commercial excellence function, and you don't have reporting and data and insights kind of clear as a base. That's, I think, you're setting people up for a failure. So getting that sorted, I highly recommend. Do you have access to insights? Are your sales reports, accessible, usable? Is data within your business, I don't know, like democratic? Like, does everyone have access to it? Or is it just the finance team that knows where the reports are?
Yeah.
Like, even little things like that, you'll be surprised.
Yeah. Basics.
How that's not set up. Yeah. And I wanted to say, when I think of commercial excellence, they're the 3 C's. And so it's like clarity, confidence, and continuity. So clarity around, the analysis, like what are your problems, defining your challenges. A big part of commercial excellence is like decision support. So that's where the confidence comes through. Okay, so this, your sales team often have like, an intuition. They're there every day, like they're in it all the time, and they're kind of feeding back, this is what I think is happening. And then you can provide the insights that back up that intuition. So that's that confidence and helping them make decisions, to invest in this or not. And then continuity, I think, is a part of commercial excellence that people often forget. And I'm really excited with like AI and how people are using that. I think there's a real opportunity there around, decision logs and tracking what happened. And, a lot of FMCG is, there's high turnover. Even within businesses that have high tenure, people are moving on to different roles. And so, a big part of growth is what happened last year. And if you don't have the commentary or the information to be able to go back to that, I think commercial excellence is in the best position to be able to build that memory part of the brain. You know,
Yeah.
when Nicole's talking about the brain, a part of a sales function, a memory is a big part of that. And I link that to continuity, key part.
Yeah. And when you were at Diageo, you played quite a key role in implementing commercial excellence through that business. So you've had first-hand experience of doing that. You've had plenty of conversations with businesses who are trying to do a similar thing. You touched on one or two pain points around implementing it.
Yes.
What else do you see? What are the mistakes you see businesses making, or what kind of challenges do you see them encountering as they try to do this?
I think what we learned with implementing commercial excellence at Diageo was very much around change management and stakeholder buy-in. I think, on reflection, I think everyone that was involved would agree that we sort of rushed it through in a way. And getting stakeholder buy-in, like if you are going to be implementing any new function within a business, change management is super important. Like even the implementation of a new report requires, appropriate change management. And I think we can, rush these things sometimes, especially under pressure, especially at the moment. And also we want to get it perfect the first time. And that's, I guess, what I was referring to before when I was talking about the industry not being great at failure and experimentation often, because we're kind of in a waterfall model of innovation, often like very traditional. And I just think that change management is the key part of it, really.
Yeah.
And that getting that stakeholder buy-in, again, coming back to Unilever, one of the key things I loved about that was they had very strong HRBPs, and that has really informed kind of my career since. I feel like I was so lucky to have, HR teams so involved in the business. Like they were often like the right hand of a commercial director or of the CEO sort of thing. And so that's something that I do notice, that perhaps if you have a really embedded HR team within the business, then things like change management, stakeholder buy-in, like they just happen so much more easy. But as soon as you sort of try to sneak something in and like do it quite quickly, that's sort of where I see it starting to fall over.
Yeah.
But the great thing with the Diageo example is, the first iteration of it wasn't quite perfect, but the second iteration and the third iteration since is like has been really built on. And a key part of that was resourcing. And, when Nicole came in, she took the commercial excellence functions to a next level and like really resourced them appropriately. And I think there was a real win from that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Also, I love a bit of a shout out for the HR community.
Yes, totally.
They don't get a lot of love from the commercial people. So I agree completely. Underappreciated.
Totally.
So we touched on earlier the idea of taking a bit of control of your own career and your own destiny, which is something we talk about frequently. Everyone should be driving their own career. You are doing something quite interesting. So you've stepped away from working full-time in permanent roles, and you're looking to build a bit of a portfolio career in the commercial excellence space. What was the impetus for that? What motivated you to give this a go?
There's probably a couple of different directions. So first I'll say, listening to the podcast, the caliber of people that you have on these different podcasts, have had great careers and have kind of progressed into, really senior leadership roles within these companies in the industry. Through all of my development conversations and mentors that I had, I recognized that wasn't something that I was, pursuing or wanting to work towards. However, at the same time, I knew that I still really loved the industry and I really loved the work that I was doing. And so this seemed like the kind of logical next step for me because, I think that in a portfolio career format, whether it's working fractionally or working in really kind of defined scope project work, or whether it's from like an advisory point of view, I think that I get a lot of value from adding value to other businesses and to really having an impact and having an influence in helping businesses on their kind of key challenges. And sometimes in a full-time permanent role, you might go into a business and you make those changes very quickly, you make that impact, and then you're still in a role for another 18 months sort of thing. And I just felt as though this type of work gave me an opportunity to add more impact more frequently to businesses that needed me, rather than, perhaps being in a business that it was a bit more lumpy and they needed me sometimes, but not always.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes a way in commercial excellence or in category. You're doing range reviews and then you're not doing range reviews. You're doing category annual plans or not. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I'm working in a newly created category activation role in Twinings back in my FMCG days. And it was newly created. I had no idea what I was doing, but eventually figured out what it meant around certain key planning periods during the year. And I remember going to my boss's boss at one point and going, outside of these periods, what do I actually do?
Yeah.
And he went, well, what do you think you should do? And I said, I don't know, so I'm asking you. And honestly, you just get these kind of the ebb and flow of those sorts of roles. Sometimes it's just the reality of it. What do you think some of the benefits are of these sort of fractional resources, fractional roles for businesses? And I've got my own thoughts on it, but I'd be keen to get yours.
I think it's the expandability of resource. I think that, working with someone who isn't intentionally doing a portfolio career versus just looking for kind of short-term part-time work because of their needs, it means that you're kind of going into the relationship knowing that it's not long-term sort of thing. Like it is, I guess you're coming in for a specific thing, you're coming in to cover a specific role, and it's okay that there's going to be an end point. I think sometimes when you go into a permanent role, it's like you're pretending that it's forever. Whereas I feel like this is more transparency on this is the job that needs to be done. And then once it's done, we're happy to move on. Maybe we'll find more work, but if not, then it's an okay thing.
Yeah.
But I do really believe that the value that comes from working with, people who are doing fractional interim work or kind of consulting based work is that expandability and the added resource for a stable base team. Like I think it's still really important that businesses invest in full-time headcount for these functions, but being able to relieve that team of having extra resource. Like how often does that come up in a meeting where, something's happened, you go to a leadership team and you're like, we need one other person to be helping with this project. And it's just for a short period of time. And there are other people like myself that are building portfolio careers like that. That is easy to step into. And those people are doing it intentionally, like myself, and know how to, come into a culture in a way that's not disruptive, come into a team, pick things up really quickly. Like if they're things that you're strong at, then I think that this is a great option for a career, but it's also a great option for a business as well.
Yeah, I agree. And we've had some really good conversations about the opportunity this could present for businesses, because what I see a lot of is use of consultancies, which is great. I'd say 90% of the kind of contract or fractional work we see is backfilling paternity leave, maternity leave contracts. It's plugging holes. And what I see more broadly is every business is under pressure to drive growth. That growth is really hard to come by. There is pressure to keep headcount flat.
Yes.
There is an appetite for greater capability in the commercial excellence space.
Yes.
And I think this is an opportunity for businesses to get access to additional resource, to bring in fresh thinking for a period of time, and to do it in a way where that cost sits at a different line of the P&L, so it's more absorbable for them. So
exactly.
I think there's a lot of benefit for businesses as well.
Yeah.
What would be one or two maybe misconceptions you've encountered about contract work?
I think one of the misconceptions is that people that are seeking kind of part-time or specifically more contract work are actually seeking full-time permanent roles, but are doing this kind of in the short term just to sort of, plug their situation. And especially in this market at the moment, I can kind of see how that can be a misconception. And, I'm in a fortunate position where that's not, I don't actually want a permanent role. So my value is that I can cover these roles and there isn't that kind of pressure at the end of a maternity leave. I know that used to happen a lot, like in the businesses that I work in, where these great people would come in to cover a short-term contract. And then there would be this real pressure to, find a role for them to stay within the business. That's probably the key misconception at the moment that I'm coming across.
Yeah.
And then,
I would totally agree.
Yeah.
With that. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what career advice would you impart?
I found this question the hardest to prep for, to be honest. Like, it took me to like wild places.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the fact that I'm coming to this portfolio career junction sort of thing, like what's led me here is, you know, the inherent sort of feeling as though, you know, the kind of traditional paths through the industry kind of didn't sit right with me. Like, it wasn't something that I was really looking for. But I think when I was younger, I was sort of forcing that and wanting that to be something that I wanted. So I think if I was going to give career advice to my younger self, it would be, I guess, to really like know myself better, know what I want more. And I did get advice like that when I was younger, sort of thing. Like, it's not like no one was telling me these sort of things, but I guess as you get older, you have experiences and you realize where that advice comes from. But I wanted to say I had this great piece of advice from a supply chain director that I worked with my first job at Unilever, who's been instrumental my career at the moment too. He said to me, there'll always be someone on the other side of the table with their own agenda and their own roles to fill. And so you have to be really clear of like what your career path is, like what you want to be doing, because it's very easy to be flattered into a role that they want you to cover rather than a role that actually suits you. I understood that really clearly when I was younger, but I think as you kind of get into your late 20s, early 30s, through your 30s into your 40s even, things change and you kind of lose that a little bit. But I think, you know, I would tell my younger self to remember that more and kind of stick to what I want rather than worrying about what other people want, thinking that's what I should want.
Even if you didn't listen at the time.
I know.
And then learn the hard way.
Exactly.
As we all do.
I mean, you always have to learn the hard way.
Of course, 100%. And for someone who's maybe a little bit earlier in career, who's intrigued by the whole area of commercial excellence, what advice would you give to them? How do they start building the skills and experience that they might need to fully step into this space?
I really think that cross-functional experience is the most important thing for a successful career in commercial excellence or in category. Actually, to be honest, in FMCG in general, again, I think I took that for granted at Unilever. That was very much embedded that, you know, you had to have had breadth in your career. You had to have gone across lots of different functions and roles and categories, and how going into other businesses, that's not like the norm sort of thing. And especially if you're within a business where that's sort of not the norm, it can be quite hard to, you know, introduce yourself to the finance team or introduce yourself to the marketing team. And it might like look a bit strange if it's not the norm within the business. But I do think for me, having supply chain experience, all that planning experience, supply planning, demand planning, and then in customer, and then across lots of different categories, that has, set me up to have, you know, like I draw on that all the time. Like I'll go into a new role and, you know, can hit the ground running so quickly because I feel like I've seen everything that could have gone wrong, that could go wrong.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's great career advice, I think, for anyone. And something we talk about all the time on the podcast and in conversations we have is seeking out that breadth of experience. And the irony is that when people are earlier in career, they don't necessarily see the value. And your ambition is to go vertically and to get bigger titles, make more money. And you can just narrow yourself really quickly. So by doing the cross-functional breadth piece, not only do you give yourself more opportunity to discover what you really enjoy, but you actually create more career longevity for yourself because you keep your options open. Yeah,
and I, you know, it's a bet that you take because I'm still like, you know, mid-career technically. And like there are definitely people that I came up with that shot up directly, you know, in one function and didn't get as much cross category. And, you know, so perhaps I'm wrong. But I think going into the next phases of your career, and especially with the portfolio career work that I'm doing at the moment, like FMCG as an industry is a real drug. Like I think that especially in Australia because of Woolies and Coles, like you're so relevant, like you're working on brands and in retailers that are so relevant to your friends and family, basically. And then to move into other industries, I guess, feels a lot harder as you get older. And that's why I think like portfolio career is something that like lots of people should consider as well. And to be able to step, you know, maybe out of FMCG a little bit, but always know that you can come back.
Yeah. And through this conversation, but others we've had as well, there's so many great benefits to what you're now trying to build for yourself. There's also drawbacks and challenges and always trade-offs and everything. For anyone listening that has considered or is considering going down a similar path in building portfolio career and doing kind of fractional work and taking a bit of control, what questions do you think that they should ask themselves before they make that leap?
I think like no one's going to want to hear this, but networking is like, that is definitely like the hardest step to take. Like if you're considering doing this type of portfolio work, like it isn't for everyone. But I think a lot of people like out there that might be listening probably think it's not for them, but it actually really is. And there's a real, you can kind of talk yourself out of it because no one likes networking. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, well, if I don't like networking, if I don't like business development, then it's not for me. But I do believe that this type of work is for a lot of people, like even people that I've worked with in the industry. I think they do really well from it. And kind of getting over like the questions that you ask yourself is, could there be some great positives of getting over that discomfort of getting better at networking, getting better at talking to people that are used to going to events, reaching out to people? And I think if you're thinking about doing it, that would be the first step, is to start connecting with your network better. And yeah, obviously it's not for everyone. Like I'm sure if you've got like kids and a mortgage and things, but even in that situation, it's about thinking like the next step on. FMCG has like it's like well known for having like quite an obsession with youth culture sort of thing. So, especially if you're mid-career, I think this is a great time to be considering portfolio career. I'd also be, if you're thinking about it and you're in a full-time permanent role now, like having that conversation with your manager about changing your work into project work and what that could look like. So staying within the business that you're working with at the moment, but stepping out and as a contractor, I think that is like the perfect place to start. Or even changing your role somehow to be a bit more around sprints, say 6-week sprints or 12-week sprints. You have to have the conversation, I guess. And if you can do that, if you can start within the business that you're in at the moment, that's like a added level that probably, that's what I've learned on reflection. Like if I could have maybe made any changes, like I'm really happy with where things are at the moment. But yeah, if I was giving advice to anyone that wanted to do it, that's where I would be starting.
Great. I think it's really, really good. And a bit of a theme through a lot of conversations on the podcast is, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And people may not even know the possibilities that exist within their current business or the current role, unless you have that conversation. So I think it's really, really good advice.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and that is really hard. Like if you don't ask, you don't get advice is like quite hard to put into place, because I'm sure there are plenty of people that have asked and they have had retaliation.
And still not got.
Or like, or may have like, you may be worried like, oh, if I'm asking for contract work or whatever, will my boss think that I'm not committed? But I think having, open and honest conversation of like, this is what I think is right for my career and my development. If you have a great manager, which as we talked about is probably the most important thing for you to have. Yeah. I think a portfolio career really adds some kind of stability. And, I got really into investing in the last couple of years, like through COVID. And again, like a great thing that FMCG like teaches you about business and the one thing that you do within investing is to diversify. And I guess if you think about that as your income, like a portfolio career helps you kind of diversify your income. And that's something that has definitely drawn me to it as well. And again, why I think a lot of other people that I've worked with could really benefit from this type of work.
Awesome. Great point to close on. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
That was another episode of Your Future in Sales and Marketing. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and maybe it's given you food for thought around your own career journey. The specialist team here at AXR are here to help you figure out exactly what yours could look like. So reach out for a conversation. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's inspiring sales and marketing leaders. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.